India's recent rankings on global indices, especially the ones that are perception driven on democracy, happiness, and such like, put out by international institutes, have been so abysmally poor that in certain cases, being ranked under countries like Yemen or Afghanistan has in fact caused most Indians to look at these ratings with wry amusement, if anything. It is a serious matter, though, because undermining India seems to have become a calling for some, driven by what only seems to be an agenda. Professor Salvatore Babones, a sociologist teaching at the University of Sydney, and whose research focus has been the Indo Pacific region, has received both adulation and umbrage for his dismissal of these venerable rankings as not being objective enough or not necessarily representative of the reality. Namaste. Please join me in welcoming yet again on our show Professor Babones, who now has an enviable following on Twitter and is quite
I'm
the
not
darling.
sure how enviable.
No, it
Sometimes
is.
it's pretty rough.
It is. I mean, people are quite, taken aback by the adulation you've received. And so, how does it feel, Professor? What are your thoughts? And I wanted to ask you. You've come out of the blue as a voice for India's democracy, literally, and an unexpected voice of support from what are considered to be antagonistic grounds of academia. So I know that our viewers and our subscribers are very, very curious to know a little more about you. So could you give us some information about, or walk us through where you come from and a little bit about yourself?
It's gratifying to have received so much support, but the fact is, I've been writing about India for the last 5 or 6 years. It's only just this paper in August that got picked up. And even then, my August paper on India's democracy rankings only got a little bit of attention in India. It was mostly noted in diaspora until I was invited to India for the India Today conclave. So I didn't so much come out of the blue from my standpoint. I've been studying India broadly since 2016 or so. I published a book on the BRICS economies, a co-authored book called BRICS or Bust, Escaping the Middle Income Trap with the economist Hartmut Elsenhans. But I wrote the India chapter for that book. And I had written several articles about India for Forbes, for Foreign Policy magazine, for other venues. It was really this one paper that just seemed to have caught everyone's imagination. That said, it was really in 2020 that I shifted from studying the Indian economy, which is my own area of professional background. I am a cross-national sociologist, but up until 2020, I'd mainly focused on development sociology, that is, on questions of growth, income growth, and inequality. And I had been studying India from that standpoint as a post-socialist transition economy. My work had mainly focused on post-socialist transition, originally in Eastern Europe and then in China. And then starting around 2016 in India, I became interested in India's transition economy. But I quickly realized that the real story out of India wasn't so much the growth. Everyone knew about the growth. The real story was the democracy. I had never studied a country that was so, and I don't mean this as an insult, I mean this as a description, a country that was so poor and yet had such a strong record of democracy. And so I was very surprised to find that the democracy rankings rated India so negatively when what I was seeing about Indian democracy was so positive. Now, that's what led to the paper that became a viral sensation after the India Today conclave. But really, this for me has been a research focus, I would say, in a mild way since 2017, and in an intensive way since 2020. I mean, I've been studying Indian democracy going back to all of the foundational documents, to the founding fathers' books, going through the history and detail of Indian democracy, writing about it. I mean, I wrote several columns for Foreign Policy magazine, which is one of the world's most respected venues for international affairs analysis, and those articles simply weren't picked up in India. So it's not, so to speak, me coming out of the blue, as India coming out of the blue into my life. I've been writing about India for quite a while.
Well, we take that criticism and critique well, and yes, it is true. I think the fact of the matter is that I think for us, I think for most Indians, and perhaps for those who are on this side of the spectrum, having a voice such as yours, especially from the academic stream, is like you said, you've been writing about India for a long time. It's just that Indians haven't picked up on it. But the engagement with India itself, like you said, you've been studying it as an academic, but does it go back further? Like, perhaps as a child where you're growing up, did you have any interest in the land or the country, or was it just an academic interest that, yes?
Yeah, sorry to say, no, I've had no romantic interest in India. I'd never set foot in India until the India Today conclave in November. I knew very little about. I still know very little about Hinduism and whether even to call it an ism. I know there are a lot of debates about that. I know very little of India's deep history, very little of its culture, almost nothing of its ways of life. I come to India as a comparativist. All of my work has been broadly comparative and focused. And as a methodologist, as a statistical methodologist, I've published a book and several articles about methods for cross-national research. In coming to this paper on the international rankings, I didn't even come to it as an India expert. I came to it as a rankings expert. That is, my CV and my background is in how do we construct quantitative international comparisons. My expertise has not, over the course of my career, been on the details of Indian democracy. Now, I've been intensively reading up on Indian democracy for the last 3 years, but that's only 3 years. My study of international rankings and how we measure, how we measure country performance quantitatively across countries. That's something I've been doing for more than 20 years. It's something I wrote my PhD thesis on, and that I teach every year here at the University of Sydney. So I'm really coming to the study of India from a different standpoint from most other academics, and I think that really accounts for the difference in perspective. I mean, I've noticed that India experts have they have much deeper expertise on India, whether they're Indian or not by background. If they spend a lifetime studying India, they know Sanskrit. They may know 2 or 3 regional languages in India. They may have a deep knowledge of Indian history, of Indian culture. People will say, "Oh, I've visited India 28 times in my life," or "I've spent how many years on sabbatical." And people like that really know India much better than I do, but they maybe don't have a good sense of how India sits vis-a-vis other countries. And really, that's what I can bring to the table, is some comparative understanding of democracy and development that's not so much situated in some deep knowledge of any one particular country.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.